Tim, I have a question for you.
Okay.
If you had to sit alone with your thoughts for 20 minutes, or you had the opportunity to push a button to give yourself an uncomfortable electric shock, which would you choose?
Well, that's easy for me, Kurt, because, I like to sit with my thoughts. I enjoy it. Who would choose the shock? Who would want to shock themselves?
I might.
Oh,
Come on. I like
oh.
to sit with my thoughts, but 20 minutes of just sitting there in a boring room with no stimulation, you have to feel like there's you'd get bored, right?
I don't find it boring. I find my inner thoughts actually kind of stimulating.
Yeah,
I don't know what's wrong with me.
Well, let's put you in a blank white room for 20 minutes with a shock thing set up, and we'll see if you might be according to our guest, 67% of men, 25% of women. They are the brighter of the two, genders here, of course. They would disagree with you because that's what they found in an experiment that our guest conducted, that 67% of men, 25% of women, they didn't sit there for 20 minutes just bored. They shocked themselves.
That wild finding is just one example of what launched Dr. Erin Westgate into becoming one of the world's leading researchers into the field of boredom. Yep, you heard it right. She is a boredom researcher. It's a real thing. And in a pointedly ironic way, it's way more fascinating than you think.
Yeah. Erin runs the Social and Emotional Cognition Lab at the University of Florida, where she studies why we get bored, what boredom does to us, and how it shapes our lives. And we learn how boredom is a feedback mechanism, that it actually helps us live more enriched and meaningful lives. Erin is also the co-creator of what is called the MAC model, MAC model, standing for Meaning and Attentional Components. Fascinating, and we'll get into that in the session. And this model helps explain boredom in ways that, at least for me, Tim, completely changed how I think about these dull moments that I have in life or at work, right?
Yeah, as fascinating as studying boredom might be, there's actually a lot more to Dr. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot more to Dr. Erin Westgate than just studying boredom from behind a desk. She lives what she calls a psychologically rich life. Now, we're talking about cave diving in Florida Springs and scuba diving every weekend, and actively choosing to engage in what she thinks might be interesting experiences, even when they're not comfortable. Now, secondly, she co-authored a fantastic paper on the value of living this psychologically rich life with Shige Oishi at the University of Chicago.
Right. Now, we spoke with Shige back in episode 491 in July of 2025. And while we talked with Erin a bit about that paper, our focus in this conversation was really more on the effects of boredom. And today we're diving deep. Pun intended there, right?
Okay.
Erin dives we're diving deep into why boredom might actually be good for you. Be good for you. Think about that, Tim. Why anesthesiologists and air traffic controllers can surprisingly be bored at work.
Yeah.
And how you can make the most of a happy life, a meaningful life, and a psychologically rich life. Spoiler alert. Those three are not the same thing.
Yeah. So to get on with our conversation, we encourage you to find a place to relax and settle in. Find a place that's anything but boring, really. And now, here's our interview with Dr. Erin Westgate.
Yeah, I better find a place that's not boring, because we're pretty boring.
Erin Westgate, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. We are so excited, and we're going to loosen things up with our famous speed round: 4 short questions, 4 short answers, just for fun, right? So let's start with, would you prefer to go scuba diving in the big, wide ocean or in a cave?
Oh, a cave, for sure.
Okay.
10 times over. That's what I was doing yesterday. Yeah, give me the caves.
Wow, that is like the fastest speed run answer I think we've ever had.
Not even an option, not even a choice.
Okay.
Give me something harder.
All right, so Erin, you have to. I think for our listeners, they're gonna go. What is this cave diving thing? Tell a little bit about what cave diving is. I know this is supposed to be a speed round, but we're breaking protocol here.
Yeah.
So I live in Florida, which is the cave diving capital of the world. And we have these tons of springs, which are gorgeous. They're blue, surrounded by palm trees. And if you swim down to the bottom of them, they have holes that the water comes out of. And you can go in those holes and go in the caves, and some of them go back for miles. And it's beautiful. I always say it's like if you could go to the Grand Canyon and like be weightless and fly through it at like high speeds is like what diving in these caves is like. It's just absolutely
Wow.
breathtaking.
That sounds fantastic.
It is. It's wonderful. Not to be like cave propaganda, but like they're misunderstood.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. Although, did it ever get claustrophobic at all, or is it ever get tight or any of those? That's what I would worry about.
I'm not claustrophobic to begin with, but like most of the caves that folks are diving around here, like you could drive like an 18-wheeler through or
Oh,
an
wow.
airplane. Like they're big and large. There is small wiggly tight cave. One of my buddies recently gave me a little shovel to keep in my dry suit pocket because I've gotten stuck a couple times, but it's fine.
Okay, all right.
It's a rich experience.
I guess it's a rich experience. We'll talk about that later too. So, all right, we'll go to the second speed round question here. Are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker? Or neither?
I'm a coffee drinker reluctantly. I've always wanted to be a tea drinker, and I've tried like every few years I try again, and I just can't do it. It seems so much fancier and like cooler, but
well, is it fancier and cooler?
I don't know. I feel like you think of people having like their little like Captain Picard on Star Trek has his like Earl Grey like and I can't do it.
Is it, and why can't you do it? Is it because of the taste, of the flavor?
Yeah, it just tastes like no apologies to you tea fans out there. It tastes like muddy water, like hot muddy water, like that someone put like my garden trimmings in, and like I can't do it.
Okay. Wow. I've never heard of tea described as muddy water, but it kind of makes sense because it's organic like that.
It is. It has that like leaves that have been sitting in water a while taste.
Yeah, I mean, there you go.
Okay.
Well, we're not getting that Earl Grey sponsorship, so I guess we'll be out of that. But okay.
Okay, third speed round question. Is thinking for pleasure harder or easier than most people think?
Oh, harder for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
We
are definitely gonna come back to that. We're gonna spend some more time on that. Okay.
All right. Erin, this is a hypothetical, and I'm going to make you pick one. And it might be difficult, and you might just have to say no. I can't do that. But if you had to define the rest of your life as either 1, a happy life, 2, a meaningful life, or 3, a psychologically rich life, you could only pick one of those. Is there one that shoots out at you?
Oh, that's evil. You know, that's my question. I get to ask people that. Evil's on me. You know, I guess I'd have to pick a rich life. Like, I don't like that because that means I'm like gonna have like a meaningless, unhappy life. But if I had to pick, I think I'd rather have an interesting life than a boring one.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, fair enough.
We'll talk about that because I think this is some of the really interesting research that you're into. So that'll be cool.
Yeah. Okay. We are going to come back to it. Let's start though with sort of what got you here. You're a psychologist, a researcher, an assistant professor of psychology. You run the social and emotional cognition lab at the University of Florida. You got a dog. You spend nearly every weekend scuba diving. You appear to have a very active and psychologically rich life. And you study boredom.
It's every child's dream to grow up to be a boredom researcher.
Not for me.
No.
Why study boredom? What got you interested?
This is such a sad story. Or I think it's a funny story, but I'm told it's a sad story. When I was in graduate school, I come to grad school bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and my advisor is like, "Let's design well-being interventions to make people's lives happier." And we think, well, everyone's busy all the time. You know what people really want, what would they'd find really enjoyable, what would really make their lives better is if we gave them like 10 to 20 minutes to just be alone with their own thoughts. And, and
We
you're
know where
laughing.
this is going.
Yes. It it turns out that was a very naive idea that we spent several years trying to do this, and what we found was that people, it was somewhat enjoyable, somewhat entertaining, but mostly it was really boring. And eventually, we actually ran a study. We're like, well, how what do you mean by boring? Like, how boring is this? And we brought folks into an empty room and said, look, we really want you to like sit and entertain yourself with your own thoughts for the next 10 to 20 minutes. But if you want, here's this button and you can shock yourself. But the goal is really to like sit and think, right? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah. And I was not surprised at this point because we'd seen that people found this pretty boring. But 67% of the men in this study and 25% of the women chose to shock themselves rather than simply just sit and think. And when we asked them why, they said it's, "Well, I was bored." And I was like, "That's not an explanation at all."
If it is, it's a terrible explanation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Like, what do you
yeah.
mean? Like, "Oh, don't wor I was bored, obviously." And I'm like, What is it about boredom?" And this is where my interest started as a researcher, was just being absolutely bemused and befuddled by this non-explanation, which is like, that explains nothing. Like, what is boredom? Why do we experience it? And why in the world would it make you shock yourself? And that's how I got into studying boredom, was in this kind of backwards kind of way to try
Yeah.
to understand this weird behavior people were doing in this well-being intervention they hated. And my career since then has really been focused on like, what is boredom? Where does it come from? Why do we have to suffer through it? And what happens when we do? And what does it look like when you take that not just from the moment to like a whole life? What does it mean to have a boring life or an interesting life? And so I'm really grateful in some ways to those participants that just shocked the heck out of themselves and told me they were bored, because they really gave me a whole career.
I've been fascinated since I read that story, that paper. Why was it that young men way outpaced young women on shocking themselves? Any thoughts about that?
We've never really known for sure. I have a lot of theories and speculation. One, there's this whole body of literature, and by the way, this replicates. If you go ask your friends and family, like if you were sitting down, like, and you had to sit and think, like, do you think you'd shock yourself? Like the men overwhelmingly like are like, oh yeah, I would totally do it. And the
Oh,
women
really? Oh,
in
yeah.
turn look at them and are like, what is wrong with you? Like, why would you do that?
So is this a cocktail party
It's a
conversation
great
that you have?
cocktail party. I'm so popular at cocktail parties.
What is your speculation on this?
I think it's two things. First, I do want to clarify that the one thing that it's not, because people always ask me this, which is that it's not that men can't think.
Thank you for clarifying
Yes,
that.
no, because I've had reporters genuinely ask me this. It's like, well, does this just mean that men can't think? And I'm like, no, that's not what this means. When we look at like how much men and women enjoyed this attempt, I would say they enjoyed it equally. The truth is they found it sort of equally unenjoyable, right? It's not that men are having a worse time or women are better thinkers. It's that both men and women are experiencing this sort of boredom, and they're just reacting to it differently. And there's two things we know. One is that men tend to be more risk seeking and less risk averse in general. So even if you don't make them bored, they're going to be more likely to shock themselves than women are just at like baseline. And we actually had to turn the electric shock up for the men up to a higher level to deter them from doing that, because we were trying to make it equally unappealing.
Wow.
Yeah. And second, there's a large body of literature that women are just I'm going to say better research participants in that they try to follow instructions more and sort of do what the experimenter wants. And
Interesting.
if you read their responses, because we do ask them, like, what did you think about? If you shocked yourself, why did you do it? Or why did you not do it? What you see in a lot of the women's responses are, I really wanted to, but I knew I was supposed to be thinking. So there's this sense in which they, I think, were trying to sort of be good participants and not press the tempting shock button in a way that the men in our study did not necessarily feel the same moral duty as participants
Wow.
to sit and think like we asked them to. And so the men and women were equally bored. The men just were their sort of threshold for pressing that button was lower, I think, for multiple reasons.
That's interesting. You mentioned happiness, and we're thinking you're referring to Tim Wilson, right, for your happiness research. The two of you developed the MAC model together. It's meaning and attentional components, right, when it comes to understanding boredom. You came out with this in 2018, I think. We actually had a conversation with George Lowenstein in 2019 about boredom because he was fascinated by it about the same time. My guess is that kind of got spurred by what you guys are doing. Tell us a little bit about the MAC model and why it's important to us.
Yeah. So at the time, we had these participants that were doing weird stuff because they were bored. And I somewhat naively told Tim, I was like, well, if they're bored, that's actually great because what we can do is we can just take the literature on boredom and reverse engineer it to figure out what causes boredom. And then we can figure out how not to make our participants bored. And he just looks at me, and Tim is the kindest, sweetest man. He just looks at me and goes, Have have you seen the literature on boredom?
Wow.
Which, like,
Wow.
is maybe one of the meanest things I've ever heard this man say. He's a lovely person. And I was like, I went home and I did a lit review, and I came back the next week and I said, Tim, I see what you're trying to say.
Wow. Wow.
And at the time, this is the mid to like 2010s, 2015, 2014, there had just been almost no experimental research on boredom as an emotion. And this is out of date, but at the time, I counted up and I believe there were less than 24 actual experimental quantitative studies where they had put people in potentially boring situations or not and seen what happened, or looked at different kinds of situations to see what causes boredom. There was just almost nothing there. And what was there was sort of cobbled together from not mainstream emotion researchers, is the way I would
Wow.
put it. And I was like, great. This is
Oh,
to
yeah.
explain what it is. Yeah, like
Oh, okay. So you felt like
I
this is green field, right?
yes, exactly,
Ocean.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's I work with a lot of graduate students now who will go away and like come back and be like, Erin, there's nothing in the literature on this, and like, they're so upset. And I'm just like, ooh, there's nothing in the literature on this. This is
Right.
fantastic.
Right.
And they look at
Yeah.
me like I'm crazy. But it's I think it's really exciting as a researcher to realize like this field is wide open. Like I can really do something here. And so I spent some time reading all of the published empirical work on boredom. And keep in mind, this was not a tall task at the time. There was very little of this theory.
Yeah, right. So you became
Which
a
is great.
scholar
Yes,
in like
yeah,
3 days.
exactly. It's fantastic. I had a job interview for, I won't say where, but for a tenure track position somewhere. And they said, a couple years after this, our standard for tenure is you have to be the world expert in this topic. And then they looked at me and they're like, you're going to have to pick another topic because there's like,
Oh, 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 ouch. But you were the world
I know.
expert.
I was like, well, hey, it's not my fault. No one else decided to study this fascinating, interesting topic of boredom.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Wow.
and so it was this sort of open, it was like a playground for a researcher almost, and that there was so much to hypothesize. And I just remember this summer so fondly because Tim and I would meet every week for hours, and I'd just be like, oh, but look, but if boredom can be caused by if it's caused by attentional misfit, then it should also be caused when something is too hard. And he's like, that's not in the literature at all. And I was like, but no, but it follows from theory, right? Like everything we know from cognitive psychology says that attention misfits can come from understimulation, but also from overstimulation. If boredom's really about a failure of attention, it's got to be both. And we argued and argued about it. And I was like, this is wonderful. That's exactly the kind of generative, theoretical idea we're looking for, right? Because it's something we can settle with experimental tests. And ultimately, that's what my dissertation ended up being, was testing these ideas that we developed, that boredom is caused by these sort of twin agents, a lack of attention. So when something is too hard or too easy, we can't pay attention and we feel bored. But, sometimes you can pay attention just fine. You just, kind of don't care about it for whatever reason.
Right.
We've all had, I think the experience of being in a class with a good teacher and they're explaining everything right, but you're just sitting there being like, oh my God, I don't care about nuclear physics or the native birds of Florida or whatever it is. And so it's not enough just to be able to pay attention. You also got to have things be meaningful. And we feel like things are meaningful to us when what we're doing aligns with goals and values that we have in that moment. And that can be big goals like getting tenure for a professor, or it can be little goals like getting a cup of coffee, not tea, coffee, during a meeting.
Of course.
Yes,
of course.
yes. But if you're missing either of those, if something doesn't feel meaningful or you're not able to pay attention, you're going to be bored. And so, we came up with this theory. And I just vividly remember, well, first we had to name it. And Tim's like, we've got meaning and attention, and mac and cheese is delicious. And I was like, Tim, we can't name a theory after mac and cheese. And he goes, why not?
and
exactly.
And you did.
And so we did.
Yeah.
I feel like it was a little bit of placeholder name, and neither of us ever
went back
gave up
and
on the
changed
joke.
it.
Yeah. And we ended up so we had this theory, and the whole time I kept being like, Tim, I can't just claim this happens because I think it should. And he goes, yes, you can. You have good reason for it. And we're going to test it. And that's exactly what we did. It's funny. You mentioned Nick Epley. He was actually the editor at Psych Review at the time when we submitted this paper. So I'm very grateful to him, both for accepting the paper, but also for all the work that he did in helping us refine that paper and get it to be what it ended up being in the end, which is still one of my favorite papers I've ever written. I'm sure your listeners don't know, but the very first line in the paper is, you will probably be bored reading this paper.
Perfect way to get into a paper on boredom.
Yeah, and everyone told me I couldn't put it in there. The reviewers, Tim, they're like, you can't start out by telling people your paper is going to bore them. And I'm like, but it will.
Yes.
But it will.
It will. It will.
Hey Groovers, quick break from the conversation to talk about something we don't bring up enough on the show.
Yeah, that's right. When we're not behind the mic, we're working with organizations to apply behavioral science in ways that actually move the needle for leaders, teams, and whole cultures.
So whether it's designing smarter incentives, boosting engagement, setting goals that actually stick, or helping teams navigate change, we bring real science to real workplace challenges.
And we don't just talk theory. Our approach blends research-backed insights with hands-on strategies that drive results. Now, we've seen small behavioral shifts lead to big wins in Fortune 500 companies and scrappy startups and even in mission-driven nonprofits.
Yeah, and we bring the same curiosity, creativity, and care to our client work that we bring to every episode of the show.
Really, I think people might want more than what we bring to the show.
Yeah, you probably have a point there. You're probably right.
Okay, so we'll bring more care and creativity to our work with you and your teams than what we do on the show.
Yes, more care. So if you're ready to build stronger motivation, better team dynamics, and maybe even make your workplace a little more groovy,
yeah, reach out to us. Grab us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or just drop us a line. We'd love to help you and your team find your groove.
Oh, well, Erin,
So
you
that's
just
how I got into
explained.
boredom.
You just explained why I'm so bored talking with Tim most of the time. It's usually the meaning part. There you go. So,
Is it
sorry about
is
that,
it just
Tim.
is it most of the time, or is it all of the time?
It's just most of the time. Sometimes you actually have some really relevant stuff. Erin, I have a question. Does boredom serve some sort of function in our lives? What does it do for us, and why? Obviously, we've evolved to be bored. So, what's your research, or what are your hypothesize about that?
So there's this idea in sort of cognitive neuroscience and in philosophy that they call the dark room problem, which is that if the entire purpose of our brain is to predict what's about to happen, right? So our brains are always working to be better predictors of what we're going to feel next, what we're going to see next, what's going to happen next. That one way that our brains can become really good predictors is to get better and better. Like advanced AI keeps improving, our brains keep improving. But there's a sneaky, terrible solution to this, which is if you isolate yourself in a dark, soundproof room where nothing ever happens, your brain will have perfect prediction all the time because it will always predict that it will see nothing. It will always and be correct. It will predict that it will hear nothing and be correct. It will predict that nothing is going to happen and be correct. And this is a major problem for understanding the evolution of human brains because we obviously didn't take that path. But why? And I think you're probably thinking, and I'm probably thinking, like, but gee, Erin, that'd be really boring to sit in a dark room for all eternity.
Right.
And that, I'm kind of joking, but I think that's exactly why we experience boredom. That boredom is a built-in emotional feedback mechanism that stops us from seeking out what they call the dark room solution. That we can make our lives a lot easier in many ways, and we can make our predictions better by never going outside and never doing anything and just playing it completely safe. But if we do that, we don't grow, we don't eat, we don't reproduce, we don't live. And so there has to be something in human cognition that acts as a brake to that dark room solution. There has to be something that is a brake to seeking the safe answer all the time, that acts as a brake to doing the easy thing instead of the hard thing. And what that brake is boredom. That boredom is aversive, right? It doesn't feel good to be bored. And when we do feel bored, what it does is it prompts us to do something. It prompts us to leave the dark room. It prompts us to, instead of opening Netflix for the 10 millionth time, to actually, invite a friend out to go see Good Boy or whatever horror movies playing in theaters that you think you're actually going to hate, but, it's different. And boredom is really important. It acts as this feedback mechanism like pain that doesn't feel good necessarily in the moment, but it lets us know, like, hey, something's not right. We need to fix something here. What I'm doing isn't meaningful, or it's too easy, or it's too hard. And I need to mix it up and try something else to feel better and get my life back on track toward those values and those goals that we care about, that we're actually capable of attaining, right? So boredom is kind of like almost like a dashboard light in your car that like goes off to let you know, like, hey, you're out of alignment. You need to make some changes and get back on track to where you want to go.
To what degree is our life better when our predictions are not matching the world around us perfectly?
Oh, that's so interesting. I think there's a really great literature on, and I know this is going to sound boring, but there's a great literature on the difference between things that are enjoyable and the things that are interesting. Now, enjoyable things tend to be familiar, comfortable, predictable experiences that we have a long reward history with, which that means is it's been enjoyable in the past, and so we know it's going to be enjoyable in the future. It's like ordering your favorite meal at your favorite restaurant. It's not new, it's not surprising, but you love it and you know you're going to love it this time too. Interesting things are complex. They're often novel. They're things that we don't understand or can't quite predict yet, but we feel like are within our grasp. But they often are also uncomfortable in some sense because of that. So the example I always give is eating an ice cream cone of like vanilla ice cream is enjoyable but not very interesting. Watching a documentary about genocide is extremely interesting, but it's not very enjoyable. And so that prediction, it's such an interesting question to me because I think a better way or a different way to put it is that predictable things are often enjoyable, but they're not very interesting. And when you have that little gap, like not too much of a gap, if it's too much of a gap, you're just like, what absurd, Twin Peaks like horror am I stuck in here? But when it's enough of a gap that you're like, oh, that's surprising, but I can see how I could have gotten there. Paul Sylvia has a beautiful phrase for this. He says, interest is about those things which are not yet understood, but are understandable.
Oh,
beautiful.
That when you, I know, I love that. I love that. And when you have that little gap in prediction, just the right gap, not too much, not too little, just enough, it's really interesting. And we find that very compelling. Many of us that, it's, going back to your question you started with, yes, some people would just like to have enjoyable lives, but many of us want to have interesting experiences and interesting lives as well. And there's a little bit of tension there between enjoyment and interest and feeling good and experiencing the world in new and complex ways.
Well, let's go down that road a little bit because you did just do that paper. Well, not just did it. You did a paper with Shigi about a psychological rich life. And I think what we're talking about here is part of that. Can you, how does that fit into your research? And then, well, let's start with that.
Yeah. So back when I was working on the MAC model, Shige was actually a member of my dissertation committee. And he looked at me one day and was like, you're talking about boredom as a feeling, but what if someone's whole life is boring? And I was like, oh, God.
Oh, wow.
Boy, Captain Happy.
Yeah. I was like, and like Shige studies happiness and well-being. I'm like, oh my God, like, are we okay here? And but he was asking a really interesting question too, which is like this MAC model we have of why we feel bored in the moment, does it extend to an entire life? And I think the answer is no.
Okay, good.
Is the very quick answer that where this is more about why we feel bored in a moment to moment basis, not like why you have a boring life, Tim, or like.
I think
Tim, notice she
I
picked
do.
the right one here. Of there we go. So, all right,
yeah. But at the time, he was really interested in this idea of, the science talks so much about a happy life and so much about a meaningful life. And it's not just psychologists, this goes back to like philosophy and Aristotle, who talks about, the hedonic life versus eudaimonic well-being. It's this really strong split. And she kept asking me, he's like, but can't you have a happy, meaningful, boring life? And I'm like, well, yes, of course you can. But like, and he's like, but I don't want to have that life. And I was like, I don't either, Shige. I don't either. And it was really interesting because psychology really didn't have a good way of talking about this idea that you could have a happy, meaningful, yet boring life. And how can that be if happiness and meaning are what it means to live a good life? Like, why would that not be enough? And so we started finding all these examples sort of in literature, in our lives, in the lives of other real people. And this grew into this body of work that started with a really simple question of like, can a boring life be a good life? It can be, but it's going to be boring. Or are there some lives that are not boring, but yet are not enjoyable or not meaningful necessarily, but have value in their own right because they are interesting, even though it comes with these trade-offs. And this sort of early talking and running studies about, would you want an interesting life or a meaningful life or a happy life, led to quite a large, I don't know, dozens and dozens of studies, so many studies that we ultimately sat down and wrote during the pandemic a paper that was like, look, a happy life is great, a meaningful life is great, but some of us want something more. Some of us want an interesting life that's full of a variety of rich perspective changing experiences, even if it comes at the expense of that happiness or that meaning. And that's what we called a psychologically rich life.
So, how did writing that paper and how did that research inform your worldview? Did it impact how you look at the world?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I think it did because I think implicitly this is something I've always cared about, right? That growing up, Eugenie Clark was like one of my like childhood heroes. She's this marine biologist who studied sharks, and I had this little book about her as in like an 8-year-old that was like Shark Lady or something like that. And I was like this is like who I want to be. And I had a good life, certainly. Like I went to college, I studied abroad, I went to graduate school. But sometime, probably around the time we started working on this rich life stuff, when Shige asked me about a boring life, I think it clocked me a little bit because I was like, yeah, my life kind of is a little boring. It's certainly not the shark lady life I imagined as like a kid. And I sat down one day and I made this like collage of like what I wanted in my life. And I put like golden retrievers all over it, and I put scuba diving all over it. And at the time I had like none of these things. And
now you have all of these things.
And I have all these things, yes. Yeah. I basically have scuba diving golden retrievers.
Yes.
And as we did this research on a rich life, it was really validating to me that it was like, you can have a happy, meaningful life and yet also want something more. And that's not a sign of being childish or a sign of immaturity or something that's just like not valuable. And I think to me, it kind of gave me a little bit of a license to be like, to heck with it. I'm getting a golden retriever. I'm getting scuba certified. I'm gonna move, when I move to Florida in 6 years, I don't even know this yet, but I'm gonna go cave diving on the weekends and go to faculty meetings during the week. I really think to me, it gave me this license to embrace this as just as valuable a part to me as my career or my friends or my family or these other parts of our lives that are often seen as more sort of conventionally valuable to leading a good life. So yeah, I think it did change me.
These aren't mutually exclusive, are they? Like the idea of having a meaningful life or having a psychologically rich life or having a happy life. If we got a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap, right?
They do overlap, especially happiness and meaning overlap a lot, and meaning and richness overlap a lot. Richness and happiness overlap the least, which makes sense because if you think of like really, really rich experiences like climbing Mount Everest, that's going to be a really rich experience, but it's also probably like a really unpleasant, terrible one in a lot of ways.
That's not going to be like, oh, let's throw back one and have some laughs about how great it was to climb Mount Everest.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like, I kind of lurk. I'm terrified of heights. I have no interest in mountain climbing or mountains other than just like looking at pretty pictures of them. But I lurk on the mountain climbing like subreddit and like to read about people who are obsessed with mountains. And they talk all the time about this idea of like type 1 and type 2 fun, which is like 100% like richness. That like type 1 fun it was like fun in the moment. And type 2 fun was like, it sucked then, but it's fun to think about now. And I'm like, that's richness. Type 2 fun is just a psychologically rich experience, but it so beautifully captures the little bit of trade-off there can be between like happiness, enjoyment, and richness. And to your question, they don't have to be opposed. I think just richness and happiness sometimes have a little bit of tension in the moment. You can still have a happy life overall that's also rich. It's just some of those rich experiences are probably going to involve some level of growth, and most growth is uncomfortable for most people.
I know that this isn't okay. Well, I've your work on happiness and boredom are just very broad, general kinds of things. But I'd like to ask if you could to think about the implications at work, because Kurt and I think about applications of behavioral science in the work environment, and so it feels to me like if boredom is the little flash on the dashboard that says, "Hey, you know what? You're hitting that. You're misfitting with too much, stimulation or too little stimulation. You kind of get back into the center part of this." To what degree do you think that applies in a work environment?
I absolutely think it does. And in fact, when I was originally looking at the existing boredom literature, two of the best studies on boredom that existed at the time were looking at patterns of boredom in the workplace. And most importantly, and what was different from every other study of boredom that existed at that time, was these two papers found not only that people were bored when they didn't have enough to do at work, they also found evidence that people felt bored when they were overwhelmed at work and when they had too much. And it's really the first time we see in the empirical literature quantitative evidence of sort of overstimulation or over-challenge producing boredom. And since then, I'm not a burnout researcher, but I've talked to a lot of researchers that study boredom or burnout, and every single one of them has sort of said to me, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like this over challenge piece of boredom, that's so that feels so closely related to our theories of burnout and how burnout happens that, eventually part of burnout is feeling disengaged, feeling unmotivated, feeling like you don't care anymore." And so something that some burnout researchers have suggested, and this hasn't been tested to my knowledge, but that over challenge may produce boredom that eventually leads to just goal disengagement and meaninglessness. So, we talked about a lack of meaning and a lack of attention producing boredom, but it's possible that those interplay in really interesting ways where too much challenge over time makes you bored, and being bored too long makes you feel like, wow, this must be meaningless to me. This makes me feel like I'm checked out and I don't care. And so I think that sort of Goldilocks aspect of attention is really important in the workplace, that it seems obvious that when you don't give people enough to do, they'll be bored at work. But I think that you can also be bored at work because you feel just overwhelmed and there's so much coming on that you're not able to do it. And yes, that's frustrating and it can be like exasperating, but it can also be boring and it can make it really difficult to feel engaged and interested and enjoy what it is that you're doing. The other half of that too, that meaning component, there have been a lot of studies that have looked at what they call utility value interventions, which
Okay.
in plain language basically means explain to people how their work is meaningful. So for instance, one of these studies is looking at people who are making like phone-a-thon fundraising phone calls and like writing like fundraising letters, that when you explain to the people, these workers, like, this is what we're going to do with that money, this is how the additional funds are going to impact, the university, that they find their work more meaningful, they're more engaged with it, and they do better at it. And to some extent, I think this is common sense that, like, if you know why your work matters, you're going to be more engaged and care more. But on the other hand, I think that sometimes is treated as like almost juvenile. Like, why do I have to explain to you why this matters? You should just know, or you should just like know is
Of
important.
course.
And
Yeah.
and we don't work like that. I always get into this at some point in Q&A. I always get into this argument about air traffic controllers. I don't know why it's always air traffic controllers, but someone always raises their hand and is like, I can't imagine that someone like an air traffic controller could ever get bored at work, because if they got bored, people would die.
Yeah.
Like, they know that what they're doing is objectively meaningful. And I'm like, no, they don't. I mean, they may know, yes.
Yeah.
But feeling in the moment that what you're doing is subjectively meaningful is really different from the abstract knowledge that something that you're doing is objectively meaningful. So just because something is objectively meaningful doesn't mean that it feels meaningful in the moment to you if you're not thinking about it. And so, yes, you can absolutely feel bored while doing something like air traffic control because your task feels meaningless in the moment because it's just become dots on a screen, for instance, and you're not thinking about the larger, abstract, deeper purpose behind it. This is one of my fun facts that makes me really popular at cocktail parties, but one of the professions that feels most bored in the workplace is anesthesiologists,
Oh, yeah.
which is a terrifying thought,
Yes.
but it also
Yes.
makes complete sense because they put you under and then they basically just
Sit
Well,
there.
you're out. So
yeah,
my work here is done.
yeah, and what they're doing is it's life or death meaningful. It's probably more meaningful than anything I do, like, on, like, a
Right.
yearly
Yeah.
basis. But in the moment, when it's become so routine and they're just focused on the concrete details, what it feels like in the moment is kinda doing nothing,
Wow.
Yeah.
and that doesn't feel meaningful, and so it doesn't feel interesting and engaging. And so I think something that, especially from sort of a management perspective, that recognizing that just because workers in a workplace are doing something meaningful doesn't mean it's going to feel meaningful to them unless they're reminded of it. And we kind of need more reminders than we think. And that's not people being silly, it's just people being people. It's just how we work, and it's how we're able to do really incredible things like put people under for anesthesiology or do traffic control, is that our brain is able to automate it and make it be so routine.
Yeah.
But that same process sort of strips it of the purpose and the meaning unless we get little reminders about it.
When you said anesthesiologist, it's like immediately go, yeah, I could see that. I never thought about that before, but as soon as you said that, it clicked. It goes, yep, I could see exactly that. They get them under, and then they sit there for 3, 4, 5 hours, however long, and they're just there, doing that. What Erin, I wanted to ask you, where is the research going on boredom? What are the new areas that you're looking into, that other researchers in the field are looking into? What should we be expecting over the next few years to kind of be the hot, cool stuff on boredom?
So
I'm sorry, did you
those
just say
words
hot,
ever go
cool?
together before?
stuff on board, that might be the first time anyone has ever uttered that sentence in the history of humanity.
Leave it to Kurt. Yeah.
So the hot, cool new stuff on boredom is so a
Sorry.
lot of a lot of the work up till now, I think, has really been focused more on why people get bored. And there's still debates, especially in the academic realm, about like some people are more on the attention side, some people are more on the meaning side. But I think boredom kind of had this moment where we're all like, oh, wow, like it's this emotion. What causes it? And a lot of people sort of flock to this. So it's funny you mentioned George Lowenstein earlier because we sort of independently, I think, both sort of were like, oh my gosh, we don't know anything about boredom. That's cool. And I think our theories are very reconcilable with each other because he's focusing more on the why people feel bored, and my model focuses more on the mechanics of how that then translates into boredom in the moment. But I think a lot of the work in the past 10 years has been about this question of what causes boredom, why do we get bored? And now that a lot of those answers are, I don't want to call them settled because all my fellow boredom researchers will come yell at me. But I think so now that we are closer to those answers, we can start looking at what I've always said is in some ways the more interesting question, which is what happens when we are bored? What are the consequences of that? And how do we use boredom to make better choices and avoid bad choices? Because there's two bodies of work right now on the outcomes of boredom that completely contradict each other. On the one hand, you have research saying boredom is wonderful. It makes you more creative. It gives you great ideas. You should try to be bored all the time. Like what we really need in our lives is more boredom. And then on the other hand, you have a different body of work that's saying, boredom is bad. Boredom causes you to shock yourself. Boredom causes you to grind up worms in a coffee grinder. Boredom causes you to sadistically abuse your kids and your coworkers, and it makes kids bully each other at school. Like, no, we do not want people being bored. And so there's this tension between these bodies of work that find that boredom creates good outcomes. It makes people pro-social, it makes people creative. And this body of work that finds that boredom makes people have these bad outcomes. It makes them hurt themselves and hurt other people.
Wow.
And it's like, how do you put these together? How do you reconcile this? And ultimately, how do you answer this question? Like, is boredom good or is it bad? And if it's neither, how do we steer it so that we get these good outcomes of boredom without all of the bug grinding and electric shocks and docking people, all these like nasty side effects.
Right.
And I think that's where the field is going right now, is sort of figuring out, what does boredom do? Why does it do these things? And how can we use boredom to steer us towards the good outcomes and avoid the negative outcomes? And my personal pet theory at the moment is that boredom isn't good or bad. Boredom just promotes action.
Oh.
And so what it does depends on what action is in front of you. So we haven't run these studies, but what I want to run in the next few years is basically versions of these studies where we make you bored or not in the lab, and we put a bad option in front of you, like grinding up worms in a coffee grinder, or we put a good option in front of you, like writing charity donation request letters. And my strong prediction is that boredom will increase both. That boredom is a signal, right, that what you're doing isn't working, that you should do something else. We know people have general preferences for action over inaction, that we prefer doing things to not doing things. And if you put people in an empty room with nothing to do, with only one outlet for their behavior, boredom is going to increase that behavior regardless of whether it's good or bad. And so that what boredom does may be more a function of the environments that we're in than it is of ourselves, which, going back to workplace management, I think my other takeaway then is like, if your workers are going to be bored and it's kind of unavoidable, make sure they have good outlets for that boredom, because they're going to do something. So you may as well have that something be something that's a good option rather than a bad one.
We like good options. Yes.
We like good options. Yes.
Yes, we do.
Erin, just digging into that. Sorry, I know we're getting close to time here, but if there was the option, so if I'm bored and I'm in a room where I have the option of grinding up worms or writing these, notes to donations and getting charity, does one take precedence over the other or is that a TBD from your perspective? Again, I'm thinking of work, like oftentimes in work, all right, I'm bored. Well, there's options I can do. I can do something productive, or I could sit there and scroll on social media and just waste time to do that, right? So I'm just wondering if there is because I'm bored, do I tend to fall into one or the other of those? Is there any pointing of that?
We don't know. I think that is the sort of the hot, cool question in boredom research.
Okay.
The closest we've come, we have one study, and this wasn't randomly assigned, so it's not even a good test of it. But we have one study where we made you bored or not. This is work done in collaboration with Stefan Fateicher in Denmark. You were bored or not, and while you're bored, you're watching this video either of like the Swiss Alps or a video of a rock. And by a video of a rock, I mean, like, just imagine like you put a rock on the floor and you videotape it for 3 minutes. Like,
wow.
It's terrible. No one wants to be in my studies. Like, just don't sign up for my studies.
Sign up for Dr. Westgate's studies.
You don't want to be in them. But during that time, you can basically press a button on the computer. And if you press one button, it will add bonus pay to another person who's taking the study with you. So it'll add
Okay.
5 cents or 10 cents or 15 cents, depending on how many times you press it. If you press a different button, it will subtract money from their
Oh,
pay.
wow.
And we do find in the standard version of the study that when you make people bored, they press the button to take the pay away from other people. That
Man.
they're more likely to dock people's pay when they're bored. So what happens when you give them both options? And this is actually kind of heartwarming. The answer is that everybody in both conditions just boosts the pay.
Oh, good.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that almost everyone, and I forget the exact rate, it's over 90% of participants in both conditions max out how much bonus pay they give to the other
To
person
the
and
other
don't
person.
press yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really sweet and heartwarming. It also, I think, is maybe the first initial evidence that we have that at least when all things are equal, right? So neither of those is harder or more difficult. You're just pressing a button. It does the exact same thing, except it's just a plus or a minus, right? Plus 5 cents, minus 5 cents. But all else equal, boredom seems to do nothing to people's choice there. That
Oh, yeah.
when they're not bored, they want to give people the bonus, and when they are bored, they still want to give them the bonus. But what I think is most notable is what they're not doing in that boredom condition, which is they're not pressing the take the pay away from people button.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
that's noteworthy. That really is.
Yes.
And that's very cool. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought there.
Oh, I think just yes. I think I find that heartwarming and hopeful, I think, in a way that we've done all these studies. My roommate in grad school, at one point, I asked her to pilot test a study, and she was like, "Is it painful? Is it boring? Is it like?" And I was like, "Why are you?" She's like, "I know you. I know what you do. I don't want to be a pilot participant in your study."
Wow. So
Oh,
you gained
your
a reputation
reputation.
early.
I know.
Yeah.
So I've done so many terrible things to people. They've done terrible things to themselves, but we've
Well,
made them bored and they
Yeah.
do terrible things. That I found it really heartwarming to finally run this study where people are given the option to do a terrible thing. And they're like, nah, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to fall into your boredom trap and press the bad button and have you talk about me on a podcast about how I grind up worms or dock people's pay. I'm going to do the right
Oh.
thing and just be nice to someone. And I think that's really a where the future research is going is understanding what is it about this pro-social option that eliminated these negative outcomes of boredom that we've seen in so many studies. Can we understand when and why these sort of pro-social positive alternatives sort of circumvent that link between boredom and bad behavior? And when we do understand it, how can we channel it to help people make good choices when they're bored instead of falling into that trap of picking bad decisions?
So when it comes to making decisions that might keep you from being bored, we'd like you to imagine that you were on a desert island for a year and you had a listening device. And on that listening device, you could only have 2 musical artists on it. Oh, gosh, look at that face. Okay.
Oh, no.
Which 2 artists, Erin, would you choose?
You get their entire catalog, so you can everything they've ever done. So it's not like an album or anything. You can
Okay,
choose
everything.
everything that they've done.
Wow, you are really thinking
I'm
about
really
this.
thinking about this. Well, I think if I was going to go into this from a research perspective, I think I'd choose one familiar, enjoyable artist. So someone that I know
Oh,
I love,
uh-huh.
and that will be my comfort food
Okay.
artist. And I think that's going to be Patty Scelfa.
Patty, wow.
Yeah.
So you're going to get into some Bruce Springsteen stuff then,
Yes, a
sort of
little bit. I'll get a
naturally.
little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
And for new, and then I'd pick something that's new and weird and interesting that I really don't listen to much at all.
Which might be
I'm trying to think the definition. It's hard because it's like the things that I've listened to. I'm trying to think of so I listen to a lot of folk, acoustic. So I think I'd choose something in a totally pop. I think I'd choose something in a totally different genre.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe some. Can I pick a classical composer?
Of
course, yeah.
That's on Tim's playlist. That's what he picks. So,
often.
I think I'd pick Beethoven. He's got a nice giant catalog of works. I've listened to one of his things ever. I've always felt guilty about it.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And then, so by the time I leave this desert island, I'll have be a more educated, rich person, even if I hate the music. And then I'll have Patty for when I'm just feeling sad and need to pick me up.
Oh, I like that. I like that. We hear responses that are often reflect sort of a sense of novelty seeking. It's like a contrast. Occasionally somebody will pick I don't know, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. Very similar. But most of the time, there's this variety seeking kind of look. But you took it to the next level. It's like, what would be interesting? What would actually bring you a whole new frame of reference? And by the way, I just happen to endorse Beethoven as a choice. Just want to say that out loud.
I mean, I might hate it.
Possible.
Yeah.
But it'd be different and be interesting, and it sounds like not a lot of new things are going to happen on this island after a while. So
well, your research with Shigate really did impact your worldview, obviously. You can definitely see this. It's like, oh, I got to go for novelty. I got to go for that, different pieces. So.
Yeah. Erin Westgate, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning and being a guest on Behavioral Grooves.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This was not boring and a very psychologically rich, interesting conversation for me too. I have to say it, right? It's in my contract.
Oh my God. Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Erin, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our boring brains. That was the easiest one I think I've had.
Yeah.
I mean, what else are we going to do? What are we what else are we going to do?
Well, now you're trying to rationalize. This is your creative moment. This is your explosion.
Where'd it go? What would I say? What else? What other kind of brains could we had today?
Today? Well, I haven't thought about it.
I don't think about it until we get to the point either. This is part of it. It's that spontaneity. It's that moment when I have to think and just come up with something. There are many times where you see me just going, la, 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 because I can't.
What about fascinating brains?
Boring.
What about fascinating brains? What about reason-seeking brains? What about meaning-seeking brains?
All right. Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas and what we learned from our discussion with Erin, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our meaning-seeking brains. How about that? Does that work?
Oh, I think that's so much better. Okay. As if. Oh my God. All right.
This was fascinating for me. And I don't say that, pun intended, of being boredom and different things, but this idea of boredom and just the details around it. Now we talked with, who did we talk about boredom with?
It was George Lowenstein. Yeah. At Carnegie Mellon. Yeah.
And I love George, but I thought this was a much more fascinating conversation about boredom. Just saying.
Well, what I liked about the conversation with George is that it was sort of a more philosophical discussion, which appealed to me.
Which is why you would love it. Yes,
I did. I love that. And
you're also a fanboy. So
I am totally a fanboy of George Lowenstein. Absolutely. My God, he was such a bright guy. But the conversation with Erin was super rewarding because she brought this whole idea she's studied it a lot. And when she says boredom is not the absence of stimulation, it's the absence of meaning, like, oh, that is a really wonderful reframe for me.
How many times has your brain exploded on this show? We should go back and like do all of the explosions that you do, because it explodes on a regular basis. I'm just amazed that it comes back together like it does.
I'm actually, it doesn't come back together in a good way, but it does somehow
come
back
together.
together.
It does. You come back. You are more informed and everything. You're absolutely right. This idea that it's not the absence of stimulation, which is what we think it is. Now that can lend itself to it, but it's the really boredom, as Erin has researched it, comes down to the absence of meaning. And I really, again, going back to our second of the intros here, we are reason-seeking machines, right?
Yeah.
And engagement increases when people can explain why or understand why they are doing what it is that they're doing, why an activity matters to them, not just what they are doing and how they can do it better, right?
Yeah, that's really well said. That it is about, we like to have a why behind just about everything that we do in life, and that's totally fair. That's just the human condition. I don't understand the underpinnings of that, but that is who we are. And of course, the consequences that people disengage when they don't feel like, when things are fragmented or confusing, if they're not really getting positively rewarded, it's like, I don't understand this, and so I'm out.
Yeah,
and that's a totally natural thing as well.
So, how do we find meaning, Tim? How do we do that?
Well, I think it's having a clear story of how we connect our actions and our values and our outcomes, right? When there's this linear connectivity between these things, that we start to feel like, oh, this is something that can make sense, that what I'm doing and what I value and what the potential outcomes are actually can be meaningful. Because we'll do things that are hard or difficult or unpleasant. Those things can have meaning. I always think of your example of camping in the Boundary Waters, and it poured. It was really unpleasant, but it gave you great memories. You were doing it for the family purpose. You had the value of doing it. The outcomes were all set. It was still unpleasant, but it gave you meaning.
It's part of a larger narrative.
Yeah,
is what I'm hearing you say. It fits into some aspect of our self-identity, of our goals that we hold for ourselves, those North Star pieces, that idea that we can fill our time with things that are just nonsensical, that don't add to that. Maybe they don't have as much enjoyment, even if they're pleasurable, as you talked about before.
Right.
And there may be, they may be boredom. I mean, I've been bored watching really entertaining, stuff on YouTube and other things, but
it was boring. It was boring for you.
It was, I get up and I walk away and then I come back to it. I don't know why. That's a whole different side. Different story. There we go.
Well, another thing that I think about is that you and I love incentives, right? And, especially for engagement tactics. But really, here's an idea to gnaw on here, is that possibly clarity and sense making in a coherent narrative at work could be a more powerful of a driver of sustained motivation. Like, you could actually get more out of people by making sure that they feel like they're working in a place where everything makes sense, where their objectives are clear, where there's some kind of coherence in the culture. That may actually be a powerful, and maybe the most powerful, underlying set of motivations.
So I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that there's probably that component. I do think, though, that there are aspects of incentives that, if I can align those incentives and engagement tactics that we use with that larger narrative meaning, so that the incentive is not just a reward at the end that is nothing more than a carrot, but it shows my prowess, my ability, my expertise. It is something that aligns with a larger meaning for myself. Excuse me. And that part of it is really important. So if you can if you can combine those two pieces,
yeah,
then I think you actually get more meaningful. I would agree with you though that we often think we can just throw money and put an incentive around something and it's going to engage people, when in fact we need to redesign the work to make it have more meaning, more connection, more purpose for people. And when we do that, that's probably a more powerful incentive than just throwing money at something that isn't.
Yeah, that's really well said. The other thing, another thing that I really enjoyed from our conversation with Erin is that the getting out of a bored space is not about just more stimulation. It's not about just saying, I just want to add stimulation because I just need something else going on in my life or at this very moment. And if we fail to address the underlying meaning or the underlying lack of meaning in our lives, that becomes problematic. That won't actually relieve the boredom. And I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about.
There was an interesting part where she talked about the boredom comes at there's this two ends of the spectrum, right? Where there's this lack of stimulation, but then there's overstimulation can also lead to boredom because you check out because it's too much. You're overstimulated and therefore you get bored. I thought that was really interesting. So.
Yeah, it makes me want to go back to something that we did talk to George Lowenstein about when he said that boredom can be painful for him. Like it is really significantly uncomfortable for him to feel that sense of boredom. And I think that fits into your overstimulation narrative.
Well, but I think there's not just that. I think that gets into this whole aspect that boredom is a device to help us understand, to steer us, right? So we don't take the easy way that we don't do this. It is a foundational aspect that helps. That boredom is a signal for us. And sometimes that signal can, obviously in George's case, that signal is a painful signal who really wants to. Other people can live with boredom a little bit more, but it's still a signal. And so I think there's varying aspects of how people experience boredom and thus how powerful that signal is to say, hey, I need to change my behavior here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because this idea that this is part of our DNA, right? This is this deeply embedded thing.
It's a diagnostic tool for us, right?
Yeah, exactly. Erin also said something that I know that you liked because it had the words ice cream in it.
but she was wrong. I will tell you, she was wrong in what she said here. It's the only part of this entire conversation where I will push back against Erin.
I just want to quote her where she said that the example that she always gives is eating ice cream is enjoyable, but not very interesting. And watching a documentary about genocide is interesting, but not very enjoyable. And
just wrong. Eating ice cream is it's both enjoyable and interesting.
What I like about
savoring those flavors, even if it's just vanilla, even if it's boring vanilla, you get vanilla bean or you get French vanilla. I mean, there's variations of vanilla out there, and the how that tastes on your tongue. How can you not, just be both find that enjoyable, but also richly entertaining and deeply meaningful? You're savoring that moment of your life when you're licking that ice cream cone.
I think I know who we should ask to be sponsors for this podcast. It's Ben and Jerry's or Breyers
Baskin Robbins
or Baskin Robbins or okay. So but this idea, how about regardless of how you think about ice cream and genocide, documentaries, which is crazy. But our brains conflate the two,
Yes.
right?
I will agree there. Yeah.
And this is problematic for us, that the emotional response that we have to enjoyable versus interesting is kind of the same. It's this blunt instrument that we have that kind of goes enjoyable, interesting. It kind of doesn't matter. It feels the same. It's just like, and you and I have talked about this a lot, like the difference between a risky situation and other situations that are not so risky but unknown, like an uncertain situation versus a risky situation. We might actually kind of feel the same way about them, but they're actually different in real life. And because we have this blunt instrument of emotions that are playing on it. So
yeah.
I only say that because I want to encourage people to go, sometimes it's worth taking time to separate those two, to separate interesting versus enjoyable. That's the point.
I like that. I think that boredom is also this like a warning light on a car, right? When the boredom light comes on,
right?
Don't just let it go like I often do with oh, what's that red light down there? Oh, I don't know. I'll just keep driving. We'll keep driving. When the boredom light comes on, it's time. I understand why you're feeling that boredom, and understand what that means. So,
yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anything else you want to cover today?
I think so. Here's the deal. Anything that can lead to boredom without the right framing. So pay attention to your life. Change the I hate this commute because I'm bored because I do the same thing every day to I'm going to a job that gives me the money that I need to support my family. And oh, by the way, I can pay attention to what's going on in the road and see how it changes every day. I don't care if it's the same path, but there are different cars, there are different people. Right. There's, the light changes, it's about what you're noticing. And I think that's really important.
Speaking of which, and this is just a complete diversion here, but I commuted to a job for many years, and for about 3 years, I would pass a guy. I was pretty regular at leaving at the same time every day. I left right about 7:00 in the morning to go to the office, and I would pass a guy who would be driving on the same route in the same direction I was, and he was on the freeway going 45 miles an hour. So everybody's passing him, right? Because everybody's going faster, and it was so interesting to me that for 3 years in a row, I saw this guy in about the same place every day driving 45 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what a life this guy has, that he doesn't want to drive any faster than 45 miles an hour.
What's interesting though, Tim, I'll take this a different direction, is you noticed him because he stood out. How many of those other cars that you drove next to were the same people, right, doing the same commute at the same time with you, but you didn't notice them because they blended in, or you just didn't, they didn't stick out, whereas driving 45 stuck out. That's another paying attention piece of this. So
there is so much more at life. Agreed. And I want to live a good life, a happy life, a meaningful life. And if I'm fortunate, I'd like to live a psychologically rich life too. And these tools are built into our DNA if we can only find a way to chip away at the things that are keeping us from living those better.
Yeah. So here's a little public service announcement. You can tell your friends that they can check out Behavioral Grooves on hundreds of different podcast listening apps, including Spotify, Apple, Podbean, or you can have them check out our episodes, or you can check out our episodes on YouTube, and you get to see these two guys with faces made for podcasting. That would be you and me, Tim.
That would be us, yes. We also encourage you to subscribe to our Substack. We've had a flurry of activity lately with more people joining and more paid subscribers.
Woohoo!
Recently, we want to thank everyone who is a paid subscriber. And we want to let you know that you don't need to pay thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. A lot of people, they want to.
But you could if you so felt like it. We would not turn that down. Just saying, you don't have to.
Is there too much? Is there a level that's too much? Is $1,000 a month too much? Would we say that? $5,000 a month? Does that get to the point where it's like, no, that maybe you should not? Maybe you should think about using your money elsewhere. I don't know. But if you just want to spend $5 a month, that would be a great way to get started.
Or 10 or 50. There you go. All right. With that, Groovers, we hope that you can use some of the insights we learned with Erin today to keep you alert to how boredom is sending you messages in your life. And then use those insights this week as you go out and find your groove.